Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Untitled Reviews. This being a show where we talk about TV shows that are dramas. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Devils. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. First and foremost, obviously, Massimo, going and checking on, seeing Carrie's body, obviously not being an easy thing at all for him. But I thought what's interesting is that he was immediately asking, could it be possible that someone injected her, like that someone killed her by injecting her with drugs? And it's like, well, yeah, but it's actually impossible to tell whether it was her, maybe she dosed herself, whether it was accidentally or on purpose, because obviously it's like, if they bring it up, if you believe there's suspicions around death, it could be labeled, it could be investigated and leave it open enough, but it's like there's nothing clear cut enough to say it. So now you're thinking like, oh, Massimo is starting to think that Dominic might be, because it is interesting that she just happens to die after he has that conversation with Dominic. It's like, oh, she died 20 minutes ago. That's why I was like, it's a little suspicious, but even I was like, there's no way. It's just kind of like sadly terrible timing. But now it's like Massimo's already thinking that, but to other people like Camille and Kate, it just seems like, oh, Massimo's not really in his right state of mind, that he's just kind of stricken with grief, so he's not really thinking correctly. Because it's interesting, too, because at first you get introduced, because obviously it's like the whole Gaddafi thing, and you're like, okay, it seemed like that's kind of unrelated, but then it seems like that heavily ties into the story, because obviously Sophia is like, oh, you left me hanging when it came to that whole situation. Me and that reporter were waiting, and it's like, for the Guardian, we're waiting, and it's like, oh, my wife died, and she's like, oh, I'm so sorry. Obviously, Paul is leaving, obviously Oliver's first day. He's excited and everything, but then it's just kind of like oh yeah, I'm replacing the dude that's literally just packing up his stuff and going. Paul's like, watch your back around here. And obviously, Kate kind of gives Oliver a little bit of shit, but for her, it's like, no, I'm not being any tougher on him than Massimo was when I first got here. So, because he's the newbie and he's kind of has to be run through his paces type of situation. But obviously it turns into the whole thing of, obviously the cops are looking at Massimo, like we already kind of saw that, and like everything kind of points to him. Obviously the confrontation he had with Ed in the elevator, obviously that got recorded, and we see that's kind of going to be used against him, because we see the cops looking at that recording at the end of the episode. But they even showed up at Ed's funeral to question him about it. But luckily, Dominic called for him to kind of be pulled away. And it's like, you can tell the timing was perfect. Like, they don't want... Because at this point, Dominic still trusts Massimo. So I think he's trying to protect him, because it's like, oh yeah, you're still kind of like my son, so I'm going to do whatever it takes. But it's also interesting how this all ties into like... Subternia. It turns out, like, obviously it's the whole conversation of like, the difference between Subternia and WikiLeaks. For Subternia, it's about those people in the banking, these rich and powerful people who believe themselves to be the new god. So people like Dominic. It's like because they go after the more like, whereas WikiLeaks is about releasing government secrets, Subternia is about going after the people who are kind of so rich and powerful and behind the scenes that you don't know how deep their involvement runs. Once again, people like Dominic Banks, like NYL. So he's about exposing them and stuff like that. But it's interesting how that kind of folds into the story, because Sophia wants, to help Massimo take NYL down, but Daniel doesn't want her to kind of go it. Like, it's like, no, like, so, because he looks at Massimo, it's like Massimo's just kind of one of these people too. He doesn't, like, his emotions don't work the same way as in humans. So I think it's like, in his mind, it's like Massimo's a part of this world, and he's not you almost look at him as like a wounded kitten, and he's not the wounded kitten. He's actually a lion in disguise, ready to rip into its prey type of thing. Like, I think that's kind of what Daniel was kind of going for, but I think Sophia's kind of gotten close enough to him that it just, especially what he's going through with the whole, Carrie situation. But I thought was interesting that as, like, she watches, like, Kate leave, and then that's when she decides to jump on stuff. I was like wondering, I guess she knew at that point like Massimo was alone, so she knew this was an opportunity to strike, so maybe that's what that was representing. I just thought it was interesting, because they didn't really explain what that meant, but I guess I didn't realize he was at home. I guess for whatever reason I was assuming it was at the office at the time, and then we hard cut to her showing up at his place, but it's like Kate was meeting him at his place because he was having Kate look into everything that happened with Carrie. It's interesting too because even Camille, and I'm probably like mispronouncing his name, I do apologize, and Kate, the back and forth between them, because like obviously it's like, oh, the whole firing Paul thing, Kate's totally fine with it because it's like Paul stabbed him in the back. It's like he should have come to him. Camille's just kind of like, oh, do we really have to kind of go about, was that really like the best way of handling, that situation? I also love that moment where they were talking about like how to handle the whole the bank situation, about like the shares and stuff that like about Dominic, and they bring up the dark pool and she's like, oh, but you probably don't know what that is, and Oliver knows exactly what it is, and you see like Camille and Massimo looking impressed, and Kate's almost like, oh shit, I didn't expect you to actually know that. It's like, oh, the newbie's not as green under the gills as you think he is. But Sophia comes to Massimo and explains like she knows why Ed died, because it turns out that Dominic is connected to someone who's connected to the bank that's supporting that has Gaddafi's bank account. So now there's almost a direct correlation between NYL and this other bank, and I think it was his name, LIA. And so she's saying that that's why Ed killed himself, because he got too tired of it, so obviously it's a lot for Dominic. I mean, it's a lot for Massimo to think about, but you can tell from the beginning, like, Sophia was kind of using him, because the moment she left, she was kind of smiling, because I think for her, she thought like, I got him, because she was kind of using Carrie as a means to kind of like draw him in, because obviously it's like, this is also connected to like this escort service, and now I was thinking like, oh, like that's what Carrie's purpose was, like to kind of push you away and keep you distracted, so you're not focusing on like, because the only person who'd be able to look into what Ed was up to is someone with your power and reach at the bank would be able to know what he was up to. So the whole Carrie thing was meant to kind of keep you from looking to, like, it's like a magic trick, all, distracting you over here while all the other real stuff is happening over here. So I thought that was kind of fascinating in the long run. But because of this, they have to, obviously, like, they use their connections to find out about, where this, party's being happening. Obviously, Oliver's kind of sweating about the situation, because he's like, the cops might start asking him questions, but he's like, but Massimo's like, they're not even going to look after you. They're after me. If they're going to suspect anyone, they're going to suspect me, so they're not even come after you for potentially stealing a laptop. But lo and behold, what do? They do come after him. And even I was immediately like, how the hell did they know about him in the laptop? Like, they went to him immediately. I'm like, the only person we saw that was like Nina, but even Massimo later on was like, Nina wouldn't do that, But even I was like, who the hell sold him out? Like, who knew about the laptop other than like Massimo's inner circle? And then I was like, well, because obviously Paul, but I don't know if he knew about Oliver being the one that had. So that's why I was wondering. But it's like, it turns out, though, at least what the cops are saying, that a maid at the house saw him, and I was like, is that real or not? Because maybe they designed it like, because I was like, usually a TV show might make a point to focus on something like that, but they didn't. So that makes me think like, oh, I don't know. But I mean, I don't know whether that's true or not, or whether that's their way of kind of covering up for the real source. Maybe that really did happen, but it's like, because obviously at first Oliver's like, oh, what do I do? Because even like his girlfriend is telling him like, don't get caught up with someone like Massimo. Like, they are just kind of looking after themselves. Because obviously for Oliver, it's like, this job is good. He can get him, his girl, and his brother out of like that neighborhood. It's like, you can, you're finally leveled up in life, and it's like kind of moving out of like the hood to be able to kind of go to like a place that's like, you don't have to worry about those type of things of having Massimo show up and you're like, yo, don't show up in a car in this neighborhood because you're going to make my life more difficult, So, we'll kind of have to see, because obviously but unlike Paul, he went straight to Massimo. I was like, I got to go to cops. And he's like, and he was like, what do I tell the cops? And he told Oliver, he's like, you do whatever is best for you. And he kept the laptop. I was like, what is Massimo going to do? And obviously, as we see later on, he sets it up to make it seem like, oh, the laptop's been there the entire time. You never found it. So, but, nevertheless, kind of circling back, Sophia walks in, makes herself seem like she's one of the escorts. Obviously, Massimo was reluctant to have her involved in all this, but she's like, I'm not a lady, but the fact is, because I'm part of this job. Like, in a sense, I think for her, it's like, oh, I'm not just some, like, lady, like, oh, I can't, like, I think she's trying to say, like, don't treat me like I'm some damsel in distress. If there's a dangerous situation, I decide where I'm going to go. And if I want to put myself in a situation, I'm not some lady that needs to be saved. I'm going to do this. And so she pretends to be an escort, gets in, and she meets with the dude who's connected to the LIA, and then also meets who's talking to Chris, who Chris is the dude who's got the vice CEO, the position that Ed, quote unquote, was fighting to gain. Obviously, it's the position that Massimo wanted as well, but regardless, it was a tense situation, especially when he's like on top of her, the way he was pulling her dress off. It's like, oh, this is about to get super sketchy, because it's like, but luckily she got him to like take a pill, like it might have been like ecstasy or something. Luckily she got the pill out, because obviously Massimo's looking at her in the car and she's like, nothing happened, and luckily it seems like nothing did happen, but it could have been close. Because later on, like, Daniel was pointing out, like, the fact is that she was taking this was personal for her. In a moment I was like, oh, is it NYL specifically? Is it Dominic you're going after? And then later on, it's confirmed. Something about Dominic in the past, like, happened that she wants to take him down. Now, what the necessary ins and outs of that are, we'll ultimately have to wait and see. But I'm curious to find out. So that's interesting. That's why she got so close to Massimo, because that was always a plan, to use Massimo to take Dominic specifically down, and I thought that was interesting. Obviously, it's about taking down NYL, because by taking down NYL, you're taking down Dominic. You know, it's like you get rid of the snake's home, it has nowhere else to go. I'm mixing metaphors, and that was just a horrible metaphor, but you get what I'm trying to say, I think. Obviously, with the photos of, you know, Chris meeting with that dude from LIL, it's just kind of like, that's not good. So obviously, you know, you have Massimo being like, release the pictures. She wants to, but Daniel was like, no, because, you know, I get why you want to do it, but it's like, we got to take this slow. This ain't the approach to do it. But she posts them anyway. Well, she goes to the Guardian lady, which I didn't even think about it later on until it's like, oh yeah, like, you know, the next day when like, Dominic has his dude tell him, like, oh yeah, like, I was like, oh, Hillary. Oh yeah, the same Hillary from The Guardian, which we know that Massimo was going to meet. I was like, oh, that's not good. Because obviously, like, you know, Dominic's been a little bit of aware of Massimo recently, but this is just going to even more set up even more red flags. And I'm like, oh, that's not good. And obviously you can tell Sophia was kind of happy about her move, but it kind of backfires, because obviously, you know, Massimo was like, I wanted you to put it on Turnia's website, not The Guardian. But it's like, at the end of the day, you know, what you wanted happened anyway. Also, Oliver's talk with the cops kept like, I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't have that laptop. So he kept it cool and calm. And even the cops were like, oh, we know that this is a chance for you to move out of that neighborhood. So they know, like, his motives for protecting Massimo. Obviously, this whole situation kind of blew up in Kate and Camille's face, because it's like, you know, for now, Kate's like, I'm not going to listen to Massimo anymore, because it's like, well, he didn't really give them heads up about him doing what he, because even then she's like, oh, how do you know about that? But it's like, yeah, it's a long story. He hasn't really told them about the whole Sophia situation. So, because obviously for them, this is their job and position, but even Camille was kind of like, if we're not careful, we're going to bring Dominic's wrath down on us, you know, so it's not just Massimo he's going to go after. He's going to start lopping off our heads as well. But boy, oh boy, it hits. It's just, oh my God, NYL is connected to Gaddafi. But it's like, he spun that shit so damn well. Being like, oh yeah, this guy we're connected to, he long left the regime. We're actually trying to rebuild a peaceful blah 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 blah. Straight up BS. And it's like, oh, you know how to spin a situation so good. So interesting, because obviously most recently we've seen some corporate spinning with the boys, you know, with the whole VOD situation. They were spinning one thing after another in season 2. But it's very reminiscent of that. And obviously I love that scene where it's just like, obviously it's that crazy thing of like at Carrie's funeral, lo and behold, was like, who's right beside you? It's Nina and Dominic. It's like, and Dominic's just like staring Massimo down, because even Massimo was like, who told you about Carrie being dead? Like, that was like, you were the first person to know about it, you know, without him saying anything. But as everyone's kind of giving their goodbyes and stuff like that, the funeral, you know, you had Dominic come over to him and talk about the fact of the matter is, I don't know what you think you know, but the fact of the matter is kind of like you're not thinking clearly. He's like, I've already lost one son. I'd hate to lose another. And I'm like, that was a subtle yet super obvious threat. But being like, because, it's like, oh, it's like basically, and even when he's hugging him, that dead stare in his face, and Nina's looking like, because Nina was kind of warning him about going up against Dominic, and it's like, this shows you, like, Dominic's got his eyes on you, and it's like, oh, you cross me again, you might just end up dead. But, oh, I'd hate to lose another son, and it's like, okay, so making that perfectly clear. But obviously, we learned from Ed's situation, obviously the police investigating it, that basically with the position and everything, he fell. I think it was like he broke like his arms or whatever when he impacted. So he wasn't really bracing himself for it, meaning that he was pushed. So, and obviously, once again, they're looking at the tape of Massimo and him arguing, and at the same time, I thought it was kind of interesting how they ended it with the whole Massimo with the whole Gaddafi thing, which I'm like, I wasn't expecting, because I'm sure that's like that's real life footage. I didn't expect them to kind of include that in the end. I'm surprised, like, just like the whole Gaddafi bloody situation at the end. I was like, it's a little grainy and it's not, you don't get it, but it's enough that I'm like, I'm surprised you're able to just kind of put that in a TV show without catching much. I mean, I don't know. The show aired before now, so it might have caught flat. But even I'm like, that doesn't seem like something you'd ever want to see. Though I'm surprised you didn't like censor that or something. Like, I mean, why? I know it's just crazy to me. I'm like, it's news footage, so but it's just interesting. I think the whole thing too is interesting at the same time of like, wow, like NYL is spinning this situation, Gaddafi's being dealt with, because obviously like a lot of like US like assets were being frozen. It was like what, millions, if not, no, probably not. I think it was like billions. It wasn't even millions. Like a shit ton of US money was frozen because of everything like that. But it's like, luckily, and even the lady was telling Dominic, oh, like, never seen anyone do what you did, so we're happy. So I guess they're like the higher ups at NYL, like obviously a lot of people behind the scenes, but yeah, like I said, a lot of interesting things. Obviously, we're going to see more and more of the cops investigating Massimo, obviously trying to figure out whether or not Carrie was actually murdered or not, and if it was Dominic. And obviously, every episode is just like, man, does Dominic just seem more and more evil, because it's like, dude, because even at first Massimo was like, no matter what Dominic is, there's no way he's basically a warlord. And it's like, he's got ties to like someone like Gaddafi and everything. It's like, Jesus, dude, that's, ugh. And so I'm curious to kind of see where all this goes. Obviously, everything with Oliver, with Massimo, with Sophia, because Daniel's kind of putting her on the short list. It's like, yeah, we're going to have to question your future with Saturnia, just because it's like you went off on your own. It's like, I get this is personal for you, but you're letting that kind of get in front of you, because it's like, I told you don't basically bring a knife fight when it comes to Dominic. You bring an entire army. So she, jumping the gun like she did, kind of blew up in her face. He literally said this type of thing has a tendency, can have the opportunity to blow up in your face, and it did. Like, he was able to circumvent the whole thing and turn it and spin it into a positive. I'm sure it still leaves a bad taste in people's mouth, but it's not the smoking gun that, because at the very, they're like, there was no proof, but at the very least, this is enough to kind of read some, with everything going on with Gaddafi at that time, it's like, this is enough to kind of make people go, whoa, wait, what? It's enough to kind of ruin their reputation at the time. So, like I said, it's going to be interesting to see where all this takes us going forward into the next episode. So it's a little behind the scenes. I'm contemplating whether or not I'm going to label this as a crime-centric going forward, because it's got heavy-ass crime drama. Even though it's labeled as a drama or a financial thriller, part of me is like, I might label it as a crime-centric because it's crime drama-ish, and that technically falls under the whole suspense, thriller, and crime drama angles and mystery stuff. I don't know. Is it really that important? No, but me wanting to label and group stuff, once again, I've said it before and I'll say it again, I'm very anal retentive about this type of stuff, so it irks me not knowing what to fully label a show. It bothers me to no end. It's like, it's one of those things that I'm like, I'm going to be bouncing back and forth on whether or not I do it or not. This isn't a crime-centric, but maybe the next one will be, like, I've done it before. I shift a show like halfway through, because I did it with Nancy Drew. It went from a crime-centric to a super fantasy. You know, sometimes I've done it with shows where in between seasons, but like Nancy Drew being the one I did. Regardless, I'm going on a tangent that's not important. Is it important to this review? Does it matter? Will it affect the reviews going forward? No, but it's just for my own sanity. Like I said, I don't know. Maybe next time will be a crime censure. Maybe I'll keep it as untitled reviews. I don't know. Like I said, I'm too. I'm like very mental about this type of shit. But regardless, like I said, I'm interested to see, where the next episode takes us with all of this. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.